Welcome to my top 31 horror movies list. Before I get started, it's pretty sad that this has to be said, but this is of course my list. That means it's just my opinion and it's not necessarily going to line up with yours. I'm not saying all these movies are the best films ever made. These are just my personal favorites and the ones I tend to revisit the most. I'd love to hear your list in the comments down below, so please share and we'll discuss. Before I get started, I'm going to set some ground rules just to let everyone know. I'm only going back as far as the 70s. I tried to stay away from horror comedies if possible, preferring to stick to more traditional horror. There will be a few exceptions aside, but I'll address them when they come up. Just an FYI, some films may not be included because I haven't seen them yet. Obviously, I can only list movies that I've actually seen. So don't kill me in the comments if your favorite movie is not included. Also, I'm not including films like The Exorcist and the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre because I've only seen them both once. And honestly, I just feel like a hypocrite if I tried to include them in this list, because I honestly just haven't had enough time with them to fully judge them. Other than that, anything is possible, so let's get right into the countdown that's sure to piss off someone. I'm starting off with a bit of an unpopular opinion here, but I actually prefer The Conjuring Part 2 to The Conjuring. I think it's genuinely creepy, and it actually kind of surprised me with the whole demon is using the ghost as a front thing to get to someone. I can't recall ever seeing that in the movie before. Plus, it was the introduction of a modern horror icon in Balak, the demon. I don't know, I just enjoy it. I enjoy the atmosphere, and I watch it every time it's on. I'm actually a little surprised that more people don't talk about this movie. I think it added interesting layers to the Blair Witch mythology, and also kind of fleshed out the witch herself as a character. I honestly think this movie is kind of underappreciated. To me, it was a welcome return to the found footage format that was made famous by the Blair Witch Project. I don't know, this movie just genuinely surprised me with the way it kind of played with my expectations and showed me the powers of the witch that I never really saw before. I highly recommend it. This is easily Rob Zombie's best feature film. It's filled with memorable characters and disturbing situations. Probably the greatest use of the song Freebird that I've ever seen in a movie. It's just going to make you uncomfortable. My only gripe with it is that it's not the most rewatchable thing in the world, but I do revisit it from time to time and appreciate what he did with the characters. This movie is the most accurate representation of the Halloween season that I've ever seen put on film. It's a must-watch this time of year. It just really nails the look and feel of the holiday. And I love how it's an anthology story, but those stories cross over with each other throughout the course of the film. It makes it just a very unique experience. I'm a sucker for a good home invasion movie. This was everything I wanted the original Purge to be, and more. It flipped the home invasion premise on its head by telling the story through the eyes of a very unique character. Erin is not your typical final girl that you would see in these types of movies. That's what makes her so great, and that's what makes this movie so memorable. It doesn't play out the way you expect it to. I'm continuing on a little streak here of modern horror. It Follows features a sexually transmitted demon that will actually stalk you in many different forms until it catches you and ultimately kills you, and then it reverts back to the person that you actually caught it from. Whether that sounds ridiculous to you or intriguing, trust me, it's worth a watch. It's probably one of the more unique horror movies to come out in recent memory. I really dug the way it builds tension. Some of the scenes are just so drug out that you can't help but feel it. Very well done. It's not common that you think of a segment from an anthology film as its own standalone thing, but that's how much of an impact this segment had on me. I'm not going to reveal too much about this one because honestly it's just better if you watch it for yourself, but I am going to say it's literally one of the most batshit crazy things that I've ever seen put on film. No spoilers, just trust me, go watch it, and if you're anything like me, you'll enjoy it. This pick is a bit controversial, I know. It feels like many horror purists kind of shun this movie. To me, this movie either works for you or it doesn't. Obviously, in my particular case, it worked. This is one of the most memorable experiences that I've had in a movie theater. I have a real appreciation for films that choose to do more with less. And there's no better example of that than Paranormal Activity. The series may have gone on a little too long and they milked it to death, I agree. But in my personal opinion, I recommend watching the first one, and I actually highly recommend watching the third one, which in my opinion added something to the franchise that I wasn't expecting. The ending of the movie just kind of blew me away, to be honest. This movie took a more satirical approach to the whole teens trapped in a cabin in the woods genre. What's interesting about it is that it manages to give reasons why teens do what they do in these situations, like the bad decisions that they make. All of this is a result of someone behind the scenes just pulling the strings. I won't spoil it because it's definitely one of the more unique experiences you'll have watching a movie, but just go watch it if you haven't already. It's definitely worth the time. Army of Darkness is actually my favorite movie from this franchise, but that is when the franchise turned into pretty much full-on comedy, so that movie technically wouldn't fit on this list, even though it does have elements of horror. From a traditional horror perspective though, I think the original is the best. It features teens getting stuck in a cabin. There's plenty of gore, there's tree rape. I mean, what more could you want? It's a Sam Raimi film through and through, and you can see the seeds being planted for who he would eventually become as a director. This one kind of blindsided me the first time I saw it. I was expecting like a cheesy sci-fi movie type experience, but I got something that was much more memorable than that. When two siblings who are on a road trip stumble upon this humanoid creature who flies and eats people to sustain himself. Oh, he also preserves the corpses of his victims and lines the ceiling of a church cellar with them. If that doesn't make you want to watch this, then I don't know what will. I think the cool thing too is it's not a happy ending, and the ending just genuinely disturbed me. Inbred backwoods mutant horror is always fun, and Wrong Turn is no exception to that. It features some pretty unique kills, and a tension-filled scene where the main characters have to sneak out of the mutant's cabin while they're sleeping. It's just awesome. Just go and watch it. This dark and claustrophobic movie can make anyone feel uneasy. If being trapped underground isn't enough, how about being chased by a bunch of chuds? That's cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers, for those that don't know. Throw in some morally ambiguous main characters, and it makes for a pretty awesome ride. I've probably seen this movie more than any other one on the list. I watched it pretty frequently as a kid, actually, and I still love it to this day. I actually didn't think to include it at first when I was constructing this list, for whatever reason. But to me, if Jaws is a horror movie, then so is this. It features ancient subterranean creatures chasing Val Kilmer and Burt Ward through the desert. Sounds like a good time to me, and it's quotable for days.
Fuck you!
I'm about to start in on a string of remakes that could trigger some people, so be warned. I'm actually a pretty good fan of the following 4 movies, which are all remakes, and I make no apologies for it. The Friday the 13th remake manages to ramp up the intensity of Jason Voorhees like we hadn't really seen before up until that point. Plus there's that extremely long pre-credit sequence that seems to go on forever. It also manages to cover ground that was previously seen in Friday the 13th Part 1 and 2. I think it's a fun ride, and I don't really understand the hate that it gets. I don't think I've ever felt more uncomfortable watching a movie than I was watching this one. It's truly horrific in every sense of the word. Admittedly, it's not for everyone, but if you like balls to the wall, no nonsense horror, this is the movie for you. The camper sequence alone is enough to disturb the most hardcore horror fan. Plus, it has surprisingly good characters that you actually come to like and root for. It's miles and away better than the original. Full disclosure, I watched this movie before I watched the original. That could be why I prefer it. I respect the original for what it is, but I respect this one even more now because it did not try to recreate the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's its own thing. The original had this grainy, kind of cheap cinematography that worked for it, and this one counterbalances that with a much more sleek and brutal experience. I think it's definitely underrated as far as horror remakes go. Again, more things that might piss people off, but I've never been a huge fan of the Romero Dead films. I understand their significance. I understand a lot of these movies wouldn't exist without them. They just never grabbed my attention for whatever reason. And yes, I have seen them. The Dawn of the Dead remake, I like for the same reasons that I like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and that it's not trying to replicate what George Romero did with the original. The zombies are fast, the social commentary is turned way down, and honestly, it's just my favorite zombie movie. I'm sorry, I know that's an unpopular opinion, don't kill me, but it's the truth. The The introduction of the horror icon known as Freddy Krueger. I was never a huge Freddy Krueger fan, to be honest, but the more I watched this movie, the more appreciation I gained for it. For nothing else is that Wes Craven crafted a genuinely unique story. I mean, what's scarier than a guy stalking you in your nightmares? It features truly iconic kill scenes, and of course its charismatic antagonist. What more can be said about A Nightmare on Elm Street that hasn't been said before? The whole series is kind of looked at as over-the-top cheesy fun, and it is that. But I think the original brings a little bit more to the table than it typically gets credit for. Admittedly, some of the things haven't aged all that well, but the surprise reveal of Mrs. Voorhees being the killer holds up surprisingly well. And it rivals the original Psycho twist, in my personal opinion. She's a woman with a motive, and she's genuinely creepy with her twisted point of view. It's just great 80s horror fun. I think Hellraiser holds up the best among 80s horror movies. It's a complete batshit crazy concept that was brought to life by Clive Barker's twisted visuals. This movie almost comes off as hypnotic to me when I watch it. Like, it's so unsettling, but at the same time you can't really stop watching it. Plus, the character of Pinhead does the most with very limited screen time. He's just a memorable character, and it has a great final girl as well. This film gives you a strong look at how people react differently in difficult situations. It's much more about what goes on in people's heads than it is about the monsters that are outside in the mist. I think Frank Darabont did an amazing job bringing this story to life. Plus, that ending is probably one of the most fucked up things you'll ever see in your lifetime. Alright, I'm a strong advocate for this movie. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's probably one of the most underrated horror movies of all time, because it's genuinely tense and atmospheric. I just felt uncomfortable watching this movie from start to finish, and I mean that in the most flattering way possible. Every knock at the door sends shivers down my spine. Plus, you have those iconic villains who are basically just doing this because the people are home. What's a scarier thought than that? I think it's a brilliant film, and it deserves a lot more recognition than it gets. This movie absolutely blew me away the first time I saw it. I know a lot of people prefer Tim Curry's version of Pennywise, but I think Bill Skarsgård did something truly special with the character in this remake. To me, he's absolutely horrifying in every sense of the word. It's got a great cast of kids that are all likable, and an amazing opening sequence that really gives a gut punch as soon as the movie starts. It's a can't miss, and I think it's one of the best Stephen King adaptations of all time. My favorite writer-director of all time wrote and starred in this movie. Of course, I'm talking about Quentin Tarantino. I love this movie so much because it's basically two films in one. It's part crime movie, and then halfway through it, it switches to this horrific vampire story. With the mixture of Tarantino's witty dialogue and his over-the-top violence, it really makes me wish Tarantino would dip his feet into the horror genre at least one more time before he retires. It probably won't happen because he only has one movie left, but we'll see. Either way, From Dusk Till Dawn is eternally rewatchable, and again, quotable for days.
They were vampires. Psychos do not explode when sunlight hits them. I don't give a fuck how crazy they are.
The more I watch this movie, the more I love it. It was supposed to satirize the slasher genre, but it actually ended up defining the genre for a whole generation. I think it's mostly unique and creepy because it adds a whodunit aspect to the slasher genre. It just makes it more realistic because literally anyone could be Ghostface. And then of course you have one of the greatest final girls of all time in Sidney Prescott, who actually thrives as a character and is given a chance to grow. To me, it's a Wes Craven masterpiece and a must-watch this time of year.
I'm feeling woozy here.
Jaws is one of those movies that people argue about constantly about whether or not it's a horror movie or not. I think it has to be considered a horror movie. What's scarier than a massive great white stalking three guys on a boat in the middle of the ocean? Plus that iconic theme by John Williams. In my opinion, it rivals the Halloween theme as far as building suspense. It's a classic of cinema, and it made a whole generation afraid to go in the ocean. That's quite an impact.
It's a tiger shark.
A what?
Alien is a slasher movie in space, pure and simple. You're just swapping out a guy with a knife with a vicious alien. He picks the crew of the shuttle off one by one. I mean, what's more horrific than an alien implanting an embryo in your chest and it bursts out? It's tense, it's atmospheric, and it has a unique setting that makes it truly a horror classic.
3 minutes.
Another whodunit of sorts, but in this case, it comes in the form of an alien species that imitates other life forms. Add that to the fact that they're stuck in the middle of nowhere in blizzard-like conditions. John Carpenter created something truly special when he decided to remake The Thing. The amazing practical effects hold up to this day, and Kurt Russell is as charismatic as ever as the lead. It's more than deserving of my number 3 spot.
If we've got any surprises for each other, I don't think we're in much shape to do anything about it.
Back-to-back John Carpenter in the top 5 makes him the king of horror in my eyes. Halloween is a masterclass of atmosphere and suspense. It's what you don't see in this movie that makes it so special. It doesn't rely on things like blood and gore. It focuses on an iconic killer with a great look and an innocent babysitter who's just trying to survive Halloween night. Plus, of course, you have the iconic score from John Carpenter. This truly is the greatest slasher movie of all time.
You haven't anything to worry about. He hasn't spoken a word in 15 years.
Anyone who knows me or has watched this channel knows my love of The Shining. I think it's simultaneously the most overanalyzed and one of the most captivating and thought-provoking films ever created. Its hypnotic score, sweeping camera movements, its creepy vacant hotel setting, it all makes for a truly unsettling experience. Then you have the iconic performance of Jack Nicholson, which you just can't take your eyes off of. Stanley Kubrick created a horror masterpiece that focused on filmmaking above anything else. That's what makes it so unique, and that's what makes it worthy of my number 1 spot.
I'm just gonna bash your brains in. I'm gonna bash them right the fuck in.
So what did you think of my list? Let me know about it in the comments down below. As always, please like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you next time right here on Real Shift for another countdown. Thanks for watching. Peace out.